I covered for my best friend after a hit and run because she swore nobody was hurt. Then I served 3 years in prison for a crime she committed. The victim's daughter later found security footage the police had missed. She called me at 11:47 p.m. and I already knew something was wrong before I even picked up, because Chloe never called that late unless her life was falling apart, or she was in one of her everything is fine but I'm crying moods. But this time there was no build-up. Just breathing, fast, broken. And then she said, "Please don't hang up on me." And I remember sitting up in bed immediately because that tone didn't sound like drama, it sounded like panic. So I asked her what happened, and she kept talking over herself like her brain couldn't settle on one version of reality. And then she sent her location, an empty parking lot with no explanation, just that. And when I got there, her car was parked crooked like she had abandoned it. Mid-thought, the front bumper cracked, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't even hold her phone steady. And before I could ask anything, she said it. "I hit someone." And my stomach dropped so hard it felt physical. And I asked if they were okay, and she nodded too fast, saying, "Yes, they got up, they walked away, I swear they walked away." But she wasn't looking at me when she said it, and that was the first thing that felt wrong. Not what she said, but how she said it. Like she was repeating something she needed to believe more than something she actually knew. And she kept repeating it again and again. They got up, they left, they yelled at me, until I asked her one more time, "Chloe, are you sure?" And she grabbed my wrist hard and said, "Yes, I swear, nobody is hurt." And that was where everything started, because that sentence became the excuse, the foundation, the lie, everything else was built on. And at the time I didn't see it like that because I saw my best friend shaking and crying and begging me not to leave her alone. And that matters because manipulation doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it just looks like someone you love falling apart in front of you. And the next morning she called again, but her tone was different, calmer, too calm, like she had slept while I hadn't. And she said, "There's a problem," explaining that a witness saw the car, that police were asking questions, that someone might have gotten the plate, and then she said something that should have ended everything right there. "I think you should say you were driving." And I actually laughed because I thought she was still panicking and saying nonsense. But she wasn't. She had already built the story and just needed me to step into it. And then came the convincing, not asking, just shaping it. "You were with me anyway. You know they only need someone responsible. It's not like anyone was seriously hurt. And then, you'd do it for me." And I remember thinking no, I wouldn't, but I didn't say it. And that silence is where everything split in half. Because over the next 48 hours, her mom got involved. And that should have been my exit point. Because when your friend's parent is actively participating in a lie, it stops being loyalty and becomes a system. But her mom wasn't panicking. She was organized, calm voice, measured words. Families handle things together. People make mistakes. We just need consistency. Like we're building a group narrative instead of destroying a life. And I want to be honest about something people don't like hearing. I didn't get forced. I got guided, step by step, conversation by conversation, until the lie didn't feel like a decision anymore. It felt like something already in motion, and by the time I realized how deep it was, my name was already on statements, already on paper, already inside a story I didn't write. And then Chloe started acting normal, almost aggressively normal, posting, laughing, going out, while I couldn't sleep without replaying that night. And every time I asked her about it, she got irritated. Not scared or guilty, just annoyed like I was disturbing her peace by remembering reality. And that was the first time I thought she wasn't just hiding something. She was moving on from it, and I was the only one still trapped inside it. Then the charges came and everything accelerated at once. Court dates, statements, people I trusted suddenly looking at me like I had become someone else. And the worst part was Chloe never corrected it. Not once. Not even a hesitation. Just silence like I had already been. Sacrificed, and she didn't want to interrupt the process. And I remember sitting in that courtroom thinking she would finally speak. That she would finally say it wasn't me. But she didn't even look at me. And that absence broke something deeper than anger ever could. And then came 3 years. A number that doesn't feel real until you're inside it. Inside routines that don't belong to you, inside a life that is paused while everyone else keeps moving, and all that time Chloe was still out there living. I know. Because people told me, mutual friends, social media glimpses I couldn't escape even without trying, new boyfriend, new job, new life, like I was a chapter she had already finished and closed while I was still stuck inside it. And the moment that changed everything wasn't court or prison, it was a message I got after I was released from someone I didn't know. A girl named Ava, who said, "I think you went to prison for the wrong person," and then sent one more message saying there was footage. And Chloe knew before I ever stepped into court and never said a word. Not once. Not even when it could have changed everything. And that was the moment I understood this wasn't a mistake she made once. It was a decision she kept making, every single day, and she never stopped. Ava's next message came in before I even finished processing the first one, saying, "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but I can't ignore it anymore." And then she sent a screenshot that made my whole body go cold before my brain even caught up, not because of the footage itself, but because of the timestamp. Because it placed everything on a timeline that didn't match what Chloe told me. Not slightly off, completely off. Like someone had been building a story that only works if you never check the clock. So I called Ava immediately, and she picked up fast like she had been waiting. And the first thing she said wasn't "Hi" or "Are you okay?" It was, "She lied to you from the beginning." No build-up, no hesitation, just that. And when I asked what she meant, she exhaled like she'd been holding it for years and explained that there was a small business near the intersection with an old security system, nothing fancy, the kind of footage nobody checks unless something goes wrong. And months after the accident, someone actually reached out to Chloe. Not the police, not a lawyer, just the business owner offering her the footage because her car was clearly visible. A normal message. The kind a guilty person would panic over. But Chloe never responded. And that was the first truth. Not denial, not confusion, just silence. And silence is always a choice. Ava said it took years before anyone even realized the footage still existed, and by the time it resurfaced, my trial was already over, my sentencing already done, my name already attached to it. And the worst part was the footage didn't just suggest anything, it showed enough. Enough to see who got out, enough to see who walked away first, enough to destroy the version I had been forced to live inside. And I remember sitting on my kitchen floor holding my phone like it weighed too much because my brain kept looping one thought. If she knew that footage existed, why didn't she stop it? And that's when Ava said something that changed everything. She didn't forget, she avoided it. Because forgetting is human, but avoiding is intentional, and I didn't even realize I was shaking until I tried to stand and couldn't. And that night, I called Chloe, not because I wanted answers, but because I needed to hear her deny it. Because sometimes you don't call for truth, you call for comfort even if it's fake. And she answered on the third ring, her voice changing the second she heard mine. Alert, controlled, like she already knew where this was going. And I asked her, "Did you know about the footage?" And the silence that followed was too long, not confused, not processing, but calculated. And then she said, "What footage are you talking about?" Which should have been a simple denial, but wasn't because she didn't say no. She redirected, and I asked again, and her voice softened. Careful, saying, "I don't know what you've been told, but people are trying to rewrite things." And that word, rewrite, sat heavy because you don't rewrite something. That never existed, and I made the mistake of mentioning Ava. And there was an instant sharp pause, the kind that doesn't happen by accident. And then Chloe said, "Oh, so she contacted you already. Not who or what, just already." And that's when it snapped into place because she didn't sound confused anymore. She sounded exposed. And then she did what she always did when she lost control of the conversation. She hung up, no goodbye, no explanation, just gone, and I stared at my phone. For a full minute before it even registered. Then the calls started. Her mother 7 times in a row, then texts, then more calls like a system had been activated, and that's when I realized Chloe wasn't acting alone. And the next day her mother called. Again, and I answered. Big mistake because she didn't ask how I was or acknowledge anything. She went straight into damage control, saying Ava was confused, that this was reopening old wounds, that I needed to be careful who I listened to. Always careful, never honest, never accountable. And I asked her one simple question. If Chloe didn't do anything wrong, why is everyone panicking? And the silence that followed said more than anything. Before she replied, "Because people don't like being wrong," which wasn't an answer at all, just avoidance dressed up as wisdom. And that night I couldn't sleep not because I was sad, but because everything was rearranging itself in my head. Every memory, every conversation, every time Chloe said, "Trust me." And suddenly it didn't feel like trust anymore. It felt like positioning. Like I'd been placed somewhere in her story where I could take the impact for her. And the next morning I got a message in an old group chat I hadn't seen in years, from my cousin Megan, short and simple. "We need to talk." No context, no explanation, just that. And before I could respond, she sent another message. "I can't keep pretending I didn't know." And my entire body went numb because that didn't sound like confusion. It sounded like confession, and suddenly Ava's words didn't feel like a discovery anymore. They felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready for, because if Megan really knew, then this wasn't just Chloe lying. It was something bigger, something shared, something protected, and I had just been the only one standing in front of it. I didn't even open Megan's messages right away. I just stared at them because there's a specific kind of silence your brain slips into, when it already knows the truth is going to hurt more than ignorance ever did. Then I finally called her, and she picked up on the second ring. No hello, just a breath like she was already bracing herself, and I said, "Start talking." And there was a long pause before she said, "I didn't want it to go this far." And that sentence alone told me everything because people don't say that when they're innocent, they say it when they've been watching something unfold and doing nothing to stop it. So I asked what she meant, and she went quiet again. Before finally saying Chloe called her the night of the accident. Not after police got involved, not after rumors started that night. And Megan said Chloe was panicking, pacing, talking in circles, and she told her everything, not the cleaned up version, the real version. That she hit someone, that she left, that she didn't know what to do. And then Megan said the part that made my stomach drop. I told her to be careful with what she says, not tell the truth, not go to the police, just careful. That word again, always careful, never right, never honest, just careful. And I sat there holding the phone, realizing something I didn't want to admit out loud. That everyone around Chloe wasn't just reacting, they were managing her, shaping her decisions, softening consequences, redirecting guilt, and I was the only one actually paying for it. So I asked Megan directly, "Did you know she let me take the blame?" And the silence that followed was too long before she finally said, "I thought she would fix it." And that was the moment something shifted in me because that isn't innocence. It's avoidance dressed as hope. The easiest way to stay clean while watching someone else drown. So I hung up without even realizing it until the call ended. And then everything got worse because Megan didn't stop there. She called my mom, then my aunt, then somehow the entire family system activated like a chain reaction. And by the afternoon I was getting calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. All of them confused, defensive, fragmented. Like nobody had the full truth, but everyone had pieces that were finally colliding. And that night, my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced, didn't sit down, just stood there like she was afraid if she relaxed the truth would get worse. And then she said, "Megan said Chloe told her she wasn't sure who was hit." And I froze because that was different. That wasn't panic, that was revision. And when I said, "That's not what Chloe told me," my mom didn't answer. She just looked exhausted, like she'd been holding too many versions of the same story for too long. And then she said, "I think we've all been lied to differently." And that sentence sat in the room like smoke because it meant there wasn't one lie. There were layers of them, built on top of each other, shifting depending on who she was speaking to. And then my phone rang again. Ava. And of course it was Ava, the only consistent thing that didn't feel like chaos or denial. And she didn't even say hello, just, "You need to see something." And she sent a video file with no warning, no explanation. And when I opened it, it was footage. Not clean, not cinematic, just real. A shaky security angle of a street, a car, movement, and enough clarity to see the driver's door open, and a figure step out. Not me, never me. And I remember my hands going cold as I replayed it because my brain kept trying to reject it like it would change if I watched it enough times, but it didn't. And Ava said, "This is why they didn't want it seen." And when I asked, "Who is they?" she said, "Chloe, and everyone who helped. Her version survive. Everyone. Not just her. Everyone." And that's when it stopped being a personal betrayal and became something structural. A system of silence. A shared decision. A protected lie. And then Ava said there was more than one clip. Different angles, different timestamps, same outcome, and then added quietly, "And your cousin knew that part existed too." And suddenly Megan wasn't just someone who stayed quiet. She was someone who had access, which meant she wasn't outside this anymore. She was inside it. And that night everything exploded. Not dramatically, but in the real way. Messages flooding. Family chats, screenshots forwarded, arguments forming in real time. People deleting and reposting, denying things minutes after admitting them. My aunt accusing Megan of distorting history. My uncle saying, "This is why we don't involve outsiders." And somehow I was the outsider in my own life. Then someone posted the footage, not all of it, just a clip. Enough for people to see it wasn't me. And that's when the family system finally cracked because once people see something with their own eyes, denial gets harder. You can argue opinions but not footage. And by midnight half the family wasn't speaking to each other. My mom called me crying. Not about me, but about everything collapsing. And I remember thinking this is what it took. Not my prison sentence, not my pain, not years of consequences, but proof. Only proof breaks silence. And then Chloe called, and I almost didn't answer. But I did because I needed to hear what version she would use now, and she sounded different this time. No panic, no tears, just tired, and she said, "Why are you doing this?" Like I was the problem now, not the lie, not the damage. Me. And when I said, "Doing what?" she said, "Turning everyone against me." And I actually laughed because it was the first time I fully understood it. She still thought this was about reputation, not reality. And then she said, "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." And when I asked, "Go through with what?" there was a long silence before she hung up again. But this time it didn't feel like control, it felt like collapse. And for the first time since all of this started, I realized Chloe wasn't managing the story anymore. The story was managing her, and it was about to get out in a way none of us could control. The next morning felt wrong. Not quiet wrong, but fake quiet. Like the kind of silence right before something collapses. And I woke up to over 30. Missed calls, half from family, half from numbers I didn't recognize, and one from Ava that just said, "It's public now." And I didn't even have to ask what she meant because I opened social media and saw it immediately. The footage, not a clip this time, but the full sequence posted under a title that made my stomach turn. Wrongly convicted woman's case finally exposed. And it was already spreading too fast. Comments flooding in every second. People arguing, people apologizing, people rewriting their own opinions like they hadn't spent years believing the opposite. And right in the middle of all of it was my name, attached to something I never should have carried, while my phone started ringing again. Chloe again, then her mother, then Megan, then unknown numbers, nonstop until I turned it off, which should have felt like peace but didn't because it just felt like waiting. Like when something becomes public, the damage doesn't stop, it just changes direction. And by noon, the victim's daughter Ava posted her own statement, short and direct, no emotion, just facts, timeline, footage confirmation, and one line that shut everything down. The person who served time was not the driver, and that was it. No more debate, no more confusion, no more maybe, just truth finally standing alone. And that's when everything flipped because people stopped arguing about what happened and started asking why it happened, which is always the dangerous question. And I was sitting in my apartment when there was a knock at the door. Steady, 3 knocks, not aggressive, not soft. And when I opened it, Chloe was standing there. But she didn't look like the Chloe I knew. No makeup, messy hair, eyes red but dry, like she had already cried everything out. And for the first time, she didn't speak immediately. She just looked at me like she was trying to find something she lost, then said, "They're saying I did it." And I didn't respond because I didn't know what she expected. So she stepped closer slowly, carefully, like she was afraid the air between us would break her, and said, "I didn't think it would go this far." That sentence again, always the same sentence, always the limit she never reached until it was too late. And I said, "I went to prison." And her face tightened like she'd been avoiding that phrase for years before she said, "I didn't tell them to pick you." And I just stared at her because that wasn't the point anymore. No one had to tell them. She just had to not stop it. That's all it took. No correction, no truth, just silence. And then she broke, not dramatically, just collapsing where she stood, sliding down the wall like her legs gave out saying, "I thought I could fix it later." And there it was again. Later. The word that destroyed everything. And I couldn't sit down because if I did, I might actually feel something for her again. And I couldn't afford that. Not anymore. So I said, "There was no later." And she nodded like she already knew. then added something worse. I kept waiting for someone else to tell the truth for me. And that hit differently because it wasn't denial, it was avoidance spoken out loud. And for the first time, she wasn't defending herself. She was admitting she let it happen. While outside, I could hear cars slowing, people noticing, phones out, that modern kind of silence where everyone is watching, but nobody is involved. And then she said, "My mom told me you'd handle it." And I blinked because that wasn't panic. That was planning. Like someone had decided I would absorb the outcome. Not just Chloe, but her entire system. Her family, her silence, all of it. And I said, "So I was your solution." And she didn't deny it. And that's what made it real. And then my phone, still off, started buzzing in my hand again as I turned it on, and it exploded with messages, headlines, comments. But one stood out. Ava saying, "Her mom is trying to say you pressured Chloe into silence. It's spreading." And I looked at Chloe, and she looked away, not surprised, not confused, just tired. Like even this was expected. And suddenly I understood something ugly. Nobody in this story was trying to find truth early. They were trying to survive the version they already chose, even if it meant destroying someone else. And Chloe stood up slowly like she might argue again, but didn't, just said, "I don't know how to fix this." And I finally answered honestly, "You don't?" And the silence that followed was longer than any of the others, before she nodded once and left without a dramatic exit. Just gone. And that should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Because 3 days later, Ava called and said, "They're trying to make you the villain now." And I closed my eyes because of course they were. That's what happens when truth arrives too late. People don't accept they were wrong, they look for someone else to blame. And I asked her, "What happens now?" And she said, "Now people decide who they want to believe, even if the truth is already out." And I realized then it was never just about Chloe or me or prison. It was about how long people can avoid truth when it's inconvenient until it becomes unavoidable. And when it finally does, it doesn't feel like justice, it feels like damage control. And I never saw Chloe again after that. Only fragments, updates, rumors, a life continuing somewhere without me in it. And I stopped caring about the details because once the truth finally came out, there was nothing left to chase. No closure, no apology that could fix time, no version of events that gave me those years back. Just reality, and the lesson I learned the hard way was simple. Some people won't stop a lie even when they know it's destroying you. And if you stay too long hoping they will, you become part of it.